2025 regular planning commission meeting. May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Chalet,
Here.
Commissioner Stringer,
Here.
Commissioner Knack,
Here.
Commissioner McCaffrey,
Here.
Chair Starter, Chair Whitehouse.
Here. Any additions or deletions from the agenda?
None from staff.
Okay. Are there any members of the public who wish to make comment on a non-agenda item? I see there are no members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time. I guess the next item is the consideration of the minutes from June 2nd, 2025.
I move we approve the regular meeting minutes of June 2nd, 2025.
I will second that.
May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Chalet,
Yes.
Commissioner Stringer,
Yes.
Commissioner Knack,
Yes.
Commissioner McCaffrey,
Yes.
Chair Whitehouse.
Yes. On to item 6, new business. I guess these are presentations by planning staff.
All right, we'll see if the new microphone works. You. All right. Thank you, planning commissioners. Going to be giving you just a presentation to frame this a little bit. You've got 2 agenda items, as Chairman Whitehouse mentioned. They are presentation items, so there will be no action taken on these. We're just kind of trying to frame some of the new information around legislative requirements at the state level that have impacts at a local level for the town of Wellington. We're introducing a couple of topics tonight on EV charging system permitting. And the second item will be on affordable housing, which has multiple layers and parts to that. There are other legislative changes that we'll bring back at future meetings to kind of introduce for landscaping requirements and practices around irrigation that we'll have to comply with. There's residential occupancy requirements, parking standards, and a host of other things that are all related to the work that we do at the Planning Commission and town staff for land use planning and housing availability in our community. So we will be, you'll see kind of a pattern in our meetings upcoming where we're kind of introducing topics, seeking feedback, collecting that feedback, and then we'll move into drafting code, scheduling public hearings, and moving on to code adoptions. So we'll have kind of our work is cut out for us for the next 14 to 18 months of compliance requirements. But we'll be working through that with you. And as always, your staff is here to support you in those. So to kick things off, we're starting with a presentation here on electric vehicle charging projects. This is related to House Bill 24-1173. So if I refer to that quickly throughout the meeting, this is what I'm referring to for this topic. Helps if I turn the clicker on. So just a little bit of background. This legislative act, HB 24-1173, requires municipalities to take one of 3 actions related to our land use permitting process for electric vehicle charging permits. So I say that specifically because it's all about the process. The initiative behind this legislation was to aid with deployment of electric vehicle charging throughout the state. I sense what has happened is local municipalities have found ways to slow down or prohibit electric vehicle charging rollout that has become a burden. So the legislature has passed this act to help streamline processes across the state to make sure that when an application is submitted, that there's a realistic expectation that has clear objectives, timelines involved for that review, and an expected result that if they've satisfied the local requirements, that it will get approved. And it has to be done administratively. I'll cover these in a little bit more detail here in just a minute. But Wellington is a subject municipality that's required to comply with this legislation, and we have to do so by end of this year, so December 31, 2025. That's why it's timely that we're presenting this to you. We will be scheduling a public hearing here pretty shortly on this topic. So in this House bill, we have to take one of these three options. We've presented these as options 1, 2, and 3. So I'll likely refer to those options throughout this meeting tonight as presented on this slide. So in a nutshell, option number 1, all of these would get to compliance with this statute. But how we get there is the topic of discussion. So in option number 1, the state has developed a model EV charging permit code. Or I said the EV charger permitting model code is the language used by the state. And this model code addresses what most municipalities broadly have in their land use code in terms of standards for development, processes, timelines, and other things, and kind of as a means to touch everything. It's quite robust. It's very well done. A lot of it may not be applicable to Wellington today. There's certainly elements of that model code that we may find useful. We may want to adopt portions of it, but a wholesale adoption of the whole model code and all of its provisions probably is more than what Wellington would need for our size of jurisdiction and the number of permits that are coming through for EV charging stations. I'll come back to that topic in just a minute. Option number 2 in the statute, or behind door number 2, is kind of a modified approach where it defines you have to do at least these things. If you're not going to adopt the model code, you have to meet these minimum requirements for timelines, administrative review, reporting, et cetera. And that et cetera was not intended to be vague, but that it's really pretty minimal compliance requirements under that option 2. But it is defined in the statute that these are the things that have to be accomplished. This option number 2, which I'll come back to, is actually staff's recommendation, because behind door number 3, or option number 3, as we called it here, is effectively the do nothing option. We have to actively take action to tell the state that we are not going to adopt any of the model code and we're not going to do these other things. We're going to opt out. I recently had a webinar call with someone who's helping the state with rollout to this, and they said option 3 could also be that you're going to write your own standards that are different than the model code, and you don't like the model code, you're going to do more than the minimum standards, but you're going to define the whole code. And I don't know that that's the appropriate path for Wellington either, due to its complexity and the number of permits that we are likely to see for this topic. So the do nothing option is probably not the good path. We don't want to be in a position where we're telling the state by resolution of the board of trustees that we're not going to do anything. Staff felt like option number 2 was probably the best fit for where Wellington's at right now. Let's meet the minimum requirements. Let's be proactive and accomplish these review requirements for EV charging permits. And we think that we can easily do that from the permitting standpoint. So adopting the code changes would solidify that what we already do, we would be required to do for any future permits. Helps alleviate some of the ambiguity around subjective reviews that they're running into across the state. So option 2 is our recommendation. All 3 of these options have some similarities in the requirements. Under all 3 of them, we have to provide written notification of a denial or the result of their application. Once we're done processing it, we have to notify them. Again, that's a courtesy that we would do anyhow, but apparently this has been a big enough challenge that the state felt the need to tell us that we have to do it within 3 days. And we have to do reporting requirements on permits. So during the period from December 31 of 2025 to December 1 of 2026, we have to track all applications for EV permits and report the results of that back to the state. I think this is kind of a litmus test. Once municipalities have put the provisions in place to meet the statutory requirements, they want to see what the effect is in those reviews for this period of time. So we'll be reporting on those in the future to the state after we adopt the code changes to affect this requirement. So just to go a little bit more detail on each of the options. Again, option 1 was the model code option. It has quite a variety of definitions. Some of those definitions we'll probably want to adopt just because if we're using them to meet compliance requirements, we'll want to have a definition for what they are. But they are pretty well defined in the code, either in the statute or in the model code. So we'll recommend some changes for that. Other components of the model code get into land use for which zone districts they're allowed in, allowed as a permitted use or allowed as an accessory use. They talk about the direct current fast charging or DCFC. It also talks about level 1, level 2 charging facilities. We can apply some different criteria to those, but at the end of the day, they all need to be done administratively. They all need to have objective standards. They all need to accomplish these minimum requirements. So the amount of materials related to those different tiers is probably more than what Wellington needs. I think a cleaner approach for us is that any electrical vehicle charging permit be handled in more or less the same manner until such time as we have the need to evaluate different nuances for those different types of permits. The model code is recommending or modeling that these types of EV stations or charging stations are allowed in most all zone districts and accessory use in all zone districts, and has some development standards around what that looks like for rolling those out for implementation. And of course, I mentioned the administrative approval requirements. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts of the model code, but again, it goes into a depth that we probably don't need in Wellington. Option number 2, digging into this one a little bit more. We think this is a good path for Wellington because it has a little bit lower bar in terms of meeting the compliance standards, and it's a little more general in its application as opposed to specific, like how to implement each individual charging station type. We feel confident in the administrative review process. That will be a code change. We'd have to add some language around our applications and procedures to accomplish that. We have a table in the land use code that identifies, planning commission approval, board of trustees approval. There are administrative approval processes in that table already for like easement adjustments or lot line adjustments, plot plans or staff administrative review. So we would need to add EV charging stations into that mix. The objective standards piece does need to be included in there. So clear expectations on outcomes, timelines, development standards, which we feel is a relatively easy path because a lot of those standards are already in our code, but we'll need to specifically make sure that there's not any way to misinterpret that they don't apply to EV charging stations or some different standard applies to EV charging stations. So kind of reviewing for uniformity of application for those and then tailoring in some of the specifics for EV to make sure it doesn't get overlooked or handled differently. And then one of the other components is we have to have a checklist available. So once we adopt the code standards, we have to put together basically a builder guide for how to apply for EV permits, and we'll make that available on our website and through other means to accomplish that minimum requirement for option number 2. And as I mentioned, the option number 3, I call it the opt-out resolution. That's not language in the statute. That's a phrase that we've applied to this. But it is an intentional act. We would have to, the planning commission would make a recommendation to the board of trustees, and the board would have to act via resolution or ordinance to say we're not going to adopt the model code and we're not going to do these other things, or that we're going to implement our own set of standards that would require more robust review and creation, establishing those, what makes sense for Wellington. And that also has to be, it's also subject to all the reporting requirements that the others are as well. So the opt-out resolution doesn't feel like a very good fit for where the state is headed. I think likely if we have a document recording that we chose not to do it, that we're probably going to get handed a new list of marching orders in a year or two. With now that you've ignored us, we're going to make you do these other things too. So voluntary compliance is probably the best path for what we're seeing in the statutes here. To talk a little bit about our existing code and our existing conditions around town, EV charging is not currently defined anywhere in our code. It's a term that's not used. We have handled to date one EV charging application. It was for what's now the Maverick site here on Cleveland and 6th Street. We handled that as an administrative approval process. We had them comply with our minimum parking standards, parking dimensions, electrical permits through the building code. We did have them put in landscaping consistent with our landscaping standards that are objective and defined in the code. And they did that through just submitting their building permit. We added planning staff comments to the building permit for meeting those requirements, and it was approved and built, and we didn't have any complaints or concerns about the timeline or how it was handled or the results. So that, in my mind, worked pretty well, which is how we would treat any application. But I wanted to put it in context that we currently have one that's been permitted in the last at least 8 years. And we had one other inquiry regarding a location for one. It was in a floodplain. We advised of that, and we haven't heard back on that application since then. It would have been doable, but maybe they didn't want to jump through all the hoops that it would have required to meet those standards for floodplain development. So maybe they're looking for other options. But from a code standpoint, it's not defined. We would want to at least define whether it's a primary use or an accessory use or both, depending on the district and what's allowed. And we said we don't have any primary uses. So primary use would be the only thing on that property is an electric vehicle charging station. So in the land use code, we need to think about what does that mean? What type of application would be proposing vacant land? Now we're going to make just a parking lot with EV charging. It's doable, but I think that's more of it's a bigger change than what we're likely to see in Wellington, where we're more likely to see accessory uses, where I have an existing parking lot. I want to make some of the parking spaces EV ready, and we don't have an issue with that. There might be some nuance to if they're changing circulation patterns or reducing the parking count or some other factors like that, but those we can define objectively so it's clear what the expectations are when they apply. And the administrative review I touched on a minute ago, so not to be redundant, but we would need to update our procedures to define that this is an administrative review process and those standards, timelines, et cetera, for how that would be accomplished, and then put together a guide clearly explaining how it works. So staff recommendations moving forward. We do support option number 2. We feel we already accomplished the administrative review criteria, but we can definitely write that in the code to make that clear and meet the state objective for having a consistent process throughout the state. Denials and conditions. There is some savings language under option number 2 that it can be denied if it's for public health and safety. And so we would want to look at that as part of those reviews. The floodplain was a good example of that. That would have been a denial unless they can meet the floodplain standards. If they're backing out into a highway, that might be a no, we can't do that because of public health and safety. But within reason on an existing site, we feel confident that we wouldn't be attaching any conditions or denials unless it were for public health or safety. And the checklist would be a little extra work for us to put that together once we have the policies in place, but certainly something that we can do in-house or through some technical assistance with the state. So that's our recommendation. We will need to make some changes to definitions to implement some of those to make sure that all the phrases and terms used in the review standards has context in the definitions, but definitely accomplishable. And there's some examples out there at the state to do that. From a district standpoint, for primary use, our current recommendation is to consider as a permitted use the primary permitted use in C1, C3, light industrial and industrial. Those are our commercial districts. Those are the ones that are most likely to see a primary use, meaning the only thing on the lot is a charging station. There are some examples across the state. I think that's probably unlikely that we get a lot of those applications, but we wouldn't want to eliminate a primary use charging station via code amendments that just don't allow it. So we do think that these are districts that would be acceptable for that. We don't recommend C2, which is our downtown core commercial. We did look at that as one of our commercial districts, and I think based on district intent, having a sole purpose parking lot for EV is probably not consistent with the community's desires for having restaurants, entertainment, and business uses in the downtown. Parking is definitely wanted, but we're working through a design improvement project for Cleveland Avenue that's going to increase parking there. And we specifically asked the community, do you want to have EV included in that project? And they specifically said, no, we don't. So we felt like that's probably consistent to not include C2 as a primary use district for EV charging, but it's certainly something we can discuss further if needed. From staff's perspective, we are recommending allowing EV charging as an accessory use in all of our zone districts. Any existing site that has a parking lot or any existing site that wants to add an EV charging station to it. Probably a little harm in doing that. It's not as an accessory use for one or two chargers. It's not going to make a dramatic difference to traffic or trip generation expectations. They can be accommodated anywhere there's a parking space. So it's probably not particularly impactful, and one that we feel would warrant allowing if a private property owner wanted to add one, meet the building code requirements for electric permitting, meet the design standards for space, size, dimensions, and other things, and wouldn't really see any reason why that couldn't be allowed. And that concludes the presentation. So hearing kind of the context of what this is, we do have to do something. We've got 3 different options to get there. Staff is recommending option number 2 and looking at the district provisions for permitted accessory uses, adding definitions and making sure that the administrative review procedures meet the statutory compliance requirements all before December 25th of this year, December 31st of 2025, excuse me. It's certainly doable from staff's perspective, but we are seeking some direction from the Planning Commission tonight on if this path makes sense to you, or if there's a different path you want staff to consider, or if there's any potential challenges through this code adoption process that the Planning Commission sees that we want to tackle. Staff can do some additional research and bring that information back when we schedule this topic in the future.
I have one quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
Yep, I was gonna say, if anyone has some questions or comments, please address them to Mr. Byrd.
Go ahead. Is it quick?
Yeah. Hilarious. Go ahead.
So by not doing it in the C2 zone district, which I get the rationale, but say for some crazy reason, the town decided to build a parking garage, right? Like somewhere that's not going to get developed for a variety of reasons, and the town invested in that, would that then prevent the town from being able to put in EV stations, or is the parking garage the primary use?
That was going to be, we'll definitely explore that further, but the initial take on that was that we have one of our existing land use categories is public parking. So where public parking is the primary use, whether they're, not EV or EV charging compatible, I think that's just a decision that can be made through funding availability and public preference for how to do that. I don't think at least our current read would not preclude that opportunity. Same thing could likely be said for if the town desired to add EV charging in public parking for on-street head-in parking. We could probably do that. It doesn't prevent us from doing it. It's accessory to the parking space that's already there. So I don't think it would be problematic, but we can definitely explore that further and make sure that if it were a desire in the future, that we've addressed it somehow in the code.
Okay, that's my only comment. I just don't want us to box us out of something that at some point might be needed.
So I have a couple of questions, one a little bit parallel to that, but first, just kind of understanding why Colorado and what problems existed that Colorado House said, we need this bill. What was the reason, like public safety? What happened that we have to have this bill and these municipalities have to agree on one of these 3 things? Do you know?
Yeah, so just a high level, and I'm not going to get into what the state was thinking or who the legislatures were that, championed this bill. But traditionally what happens in instances like this is the private sector, through trying to roll something out, either wasn't able to, met roadblocks, got inconsistent results. And so states, this has happened in other states that I've worked into, not for EV, but for broadband deployment or telecommunications deployment. What happens when each municipality does things differently, the same company trying to build the same product in multiple communities, they don't have a consistent expectation for what they need to bring to the table. And every local jurisdiction says, here's our way of doing it. You have to do this or you don't get your approval. And those companies tend to lobby the state and say, we'd really like it if this was consistent, a clear expectation, a timeline that makes sense for the application type that we're submitting. And if enough ears get reached, then they pass legislation like this. This bill, HB 24-1173, does identify the growing number of electric vehicles that are on the roads today, It identifies that more Coloradoans are choosing this option, and there's not widespread availability of EV charging stations throughout the state. So those are some of the reasons that why it happens and what we've likely seen in the state of Colorado for the state to take action to create this consistency.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I didn't know if it was like a traffic thing, or that makes sense though. And then the C2, as I was thinking of that, as we're going through this Cleveland construction project, people are coming through town, and when we're trying to bring people into downtown, whether it's off the highway, we're going to have more of these EV vehicles, especially from Wyoming, that definitely might not have as many stops, north. Coming in, hey, come to our downtown. But we've kind of indicated no, we don't have any EV charging stations except for Mavericks. That kind of seems a little like we should consider that bringing people in. I'm going to have dinner. I just need to plug my car in and walk across to the grill, or wherever that's at. So, and if it's the town even, would the town ever be able to say, hey, we've got this parking lot. I mean, let's use our existing one that we have there. Would the town ever say, you know what, let's put a couple EVs in for the, sake of our downtown business district?
My question is, would that be precluded to put in like one or two chargers that would not be in the C2 district, correct?
Correct. That'd be my read on it, and the staff recommendation is to allow accessory use EV charging in any zone district. So if a private business owner had 2 off-street parking spaces and wanted to put EV there, they would be able to do so through an accessory use. Is
Okay.
what staff is recommending. We can definitely talk about that in more detail, but that's our current recommendation is if anyone wants to do it voluntarily on private property, submit your permit, we'll review it to those objective standards, and you're likely going to get approval.
Okay. Well, and a little
Yeah.
bit, too, just the arena that I'm working in. Not that we want that, but, to continue to do business. But now I hear that's an accessory use potentially.
That's
I'm not
recommend-
opening up, just a whole parking lot of EV only.
Right, and
Okay.
that's where it would get back to maybe Commissioner Cholet's question on the C2 zoning, that if you're taking a vacant parcel and you're building a parking lot solely for electric vehicles, that's a primary use consideration, and that may not fit the downtown's overall district intent. So weaving them in available parking spaces to meet the need, I think is definitely supportive. But saying that we're going to dedicate an entire property to just the sole purpose of electric vehicle charging probably is not a good fit currently. It could be in the future. We can always change that. But
Mhm.
presently, I don't think that meets the highest and best use needs of the C2 district that has limited availability.
Okay.
Certainly open to other comments and direction on that topic, but that's where staff is kind of seeing things
No,
currently.
that makes sense. I didn't really register the accessory word.
Sure,
So
yeah.
makes sense.
It's all new topics, so
Yeah.
those are all great questions to dig into.
What kind of an impact would the EV chargers have on the electrical grid that we currently have? And is the town set up with the electrical services that we currently have to accommodate EV chargers? And if it's not, what would it cost to the town and the citizens to actually have to get those upgraded to meet the EV charger requirements?
Yeah, great question, Commissioner Stringer. As part of this process and rolling out, recommendations for code adoption, we're going to be reaching out to Xcel Energy and Poudre Valley REA. There are 2 electric providers. Those are the kinds of questions we want to know from them. The permitting side of things is one thing. Availability and deployment could be a different matter altogether. So typically the developer is required to meet their needs. So if an extension or 3-phase power or something like that is needed to a site, they're typically tasked with making sure that gets to their site for their needs. But we will ask the more general question of, will the electric grid support widespread deployment of these or accessory uses? If there's any hesitation or limitations on what that looks like, we'll bring that back with the next round of conversations. Currently, I don't believe that that's going to be extremely impactful to the grid, but we'll hear from them if that's a factor or not. We'll also be reaching out to the fire district and our building department for specific input on deployment and permitting requirements around EV charging stations for their input as well.
And are these districts, are they more so the commercial districts that we're talking about, or is this going to be put into some of the residentials, like the new developments that we're currently looking at? Because we're talking affordable housing. Now you start adding EVs into every house, the price of your houses that we're trying to keep affordable are now going up.
Yeah, so we'll have to balance, requirements, with, costs, but also is it a requirement or we're not requiring, so this legislation is just regarding the land use permitting processes. It's not the electric energy or the, solar ready, electric ready permit that affects building code. That's a different act that our building team is going to be working through. So there's two different nuances there. We have to comply with both. But I think what Commissioner Stringer was alluding to perhaps was the electric ready code requirements associated with building. That does require every new residential structure to have the ability to add an EV charging station to it as a minimum requirement. So we're working through that piece, but that would be separate from a private landowner applying for a charging station that's open to the public as opposed to for private use. I think it could impact for like multifamily apartments. If they wanted to add EV charging, they could do so of their own volition. We'd run it through this process, but staff is not currently recommending requiring those for commercial developments.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I do have, anyone else have any comments or questions? So I guess my one thought or question is a 3-day turnaround. So this is would be the acceptance of a permit, like yes, no, but then obviously there's electrical, there's circulation, there's traffic, there's a whole bunch of, and obviously that cannot all be resolved in a 3-day. Or so,
Right.
so what happens if there's some, like you mentioned a individual wanted to do it in a floodplain? They're like, you can do it, but there's a whole other, so I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
is the 3 days actually reasonable to give it kind of the high look down and go, this will work, but obviously there's a whole bunch of other aspects that come into play that do not occur within that 3-day time frame.
Yeah, so let me clarify the 3 days. That requirement identified in the statute is referring to once a decision has been made, we're required to notify them within 3 days.
Okay.
Not the full review process. I'm going to look to Mr. Checkett here. Do you recall on the timeline for the review compliance for once an application is complete for that administrative review, or is that a requirement identified in the statute?
I don't believe that there's any explicit timeline given for review process. The 3 days, as Mr. Bird mentioned, is just for notifying an applicant of the decision, which staff follows 3 days. Like staff gets a decision well within that time period, so that's not something that's likely to change our.
Okay,
practice.
that was thank you for clarifying that, because I was like, I gotta do this in 3 days. That's
Yeah.
the notification is 3 days from decision.
From decision.
Thank you
And-
very much.
Yep, and just for what that's worth, one of the things that is in our code and many other codes across the state is language that's kind of a savings clause that says if the town takes no action, it's either automatically denied or automatically approved. And like our code currently says, if town takes no action within 30 days, then it's automatically deemed to be denied. We can't just sit on that and say, oh yeah, you didn't know 30 days have passed, so your application's denied, you have to resubmit or, see ya. We have to notify them that we denied it within 3 days of that decision being made or a timeline lapsing. We have to provide the notice, so they're not left hanging uncertain what happened with their application.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to come back to this topic on the next presentation too, regarding timelines and completeness checks and minimum timelines for turnaround. That's why I asked Mr. Checkett. I've got the next presentations in the back of my mind for timelines, and we're going to dive into that in a minute.
Okay, so are you looking for a show of hands, a sense of what the individual sitting here, what option do they feel? Or, whether option two is sort of the staff recommendation? Anyone, how you feel other options or additions to how option two was laid out, or option one or option three? If we can provide some guidance.
Do we need a motion on that?
It's not an action item, so, and you don't even have to have consensus. Kind of what we're looking for are what the path that staff laid out. We know that we can support it from a staff standpoint. But if there was a desire to use option three, like, we don't want to do any of that, Mr. Byrd. We just want to opt out. Like, that was something that we would need to hear, or we want to learn more about the model code and its intricacies. We would want to know that so that we can bring back the right information for the next conversation. Some feedback too we've already had a little bit of conversation around primary use, accessory use, but if there were any objections to what staff is recommending, we want to hear that so we can look into it further or bring the right information back to the table.
I would think option two is viable.
I would agree. I like option two. My only question is around the whole C2 thing, right? Just that we don't box ourselves out. So, but I don't think there's a reason to make things more cumbersome by going with the option one. And I don't think it's a good idea to thumbs down the state either. I think we pay for that in the long run. So yeah, option two works.
Agreed. You as well?
Yep.
Okay, I would also opt for option two. I think, as you stated, maybe the option one might be a little more cumbersome than is required in a smaller municipality. Maybe it's appropriate for Denver or Loveland or Fort Collins. I don't know what they use, but so it seems like the consensus is option two seems to be.
Yep.
Meet the minimums. Option two was kind of meet the minimum standards to be in compliance, adopt the right definitions that are associated with that, and not to go overboard with defining new standards for something that doesn't exist in the code currently.
I believe that is it.
And feel good on the accessory use in all zone districts, primary, probably limited to commercial. We'll look more into C2 to make sure we're not overlooking some detail.
Yep. No, I'm good. Yep.
Okay. Very good. Well, I feel like that gives us good direction. Mr. Checkett, any other considerations that you think were salient to the presentation tonight that we need guidance on?
No, I don't think so. I think this is appropriate. And if any of you do have any questions about the other options, the model code, the opt-out, feel free to relay them and I can get those to you. We will be discussing this at our next meeting, hopefully with kind of a more, I think we're looking to adopt code changes at the next meeting, but this is an ongoing conversation. We'll be discussing this at the board next week. So if you have any further thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out to me or Mr. Byrd or Ms. Lenore or anyone.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
will take those marching orders and begin the next steps. You want to go ahead and get the next presentation ready? Chairman, are you ready for us to move on to 6B?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Please continue.
thank you. So I'm going to introduce this presentation, then I'll be calling on Ms. Lenore to come up and assist with this presentation. Get my clicker now that this works. So this presentation is on housing affordability. Again, we've had a handful, no less than 6 statutes addressing housing affordability, but with the caveat that they do also create some funding opportunities for us to consider. So it's not a completely unfunded mandate, but there is a lot of work to do. Just to kind of give you guys a quick recap on housing affordability, we've taken some first steps to address Senate Bill 24-174. This was a statutory provision that required us to adopt a housing needs assessment, and we have recently completed that housing needs and affordability assessment. Matrix Design Group assisted us with that, and we presented the final report for acceptance in April, for I think both Planning Commission and Board in April. So we do have that housing needs assessment. We've submitted that to the state for their acceptance of that document, and they're currently in the process of reviewing that to let us know whether they can accept it or not. But we feel pretty good that we will get there. This Senate Bill 24-174 also had a number of other provisions required of it, including that we have to adopt a housing action plan that references the housing needs assessment. So it had a staggered timeline requirement on it. Do the housing needs assessment first, then create a housing action plan. The housing action plan needs to be referenced in our comprehensive plan. And we have to also adopt a water supply element component of our comprehensive plan, as well as address the state strategic growth element report in our comprehensive plan, all informing that housing action plan. And that has to be accomplished by 2 of them by end of 26 and the housing action plan by end of 27. So we have our work cut out for us on those. But fortunately, we have really talented and dedicated staff to dig into these topics and provide recommendations for how we're going to do that. You might recall from our housing needs assessment, we're going to dive into this in a little bit more detail in just a moment, but it had recommendations for meeting our housing needs for Wellington, including area median income requirements and number of units available. We had metrics for cost burdened and severely cost burdened households where they're spending more than 30 or more than 50% of their household income on housing costs. And we want to bring those gaps down to make more housing more affordable for lower income earners. So that is part of what informed the need. So we now have our target numbers as part of the legislative acts that required these different elements. They also created funding mechanisms for going about applying for grants to get resources to help accomplish those things. We used grant funds for Innovative Housing Opportunities Program, IHOP, to do our housing needs assessment. So we've already tapped into that a little bit. And part of what staff would like to do is begin looking at applying to housing planning grants. There's different acronyms at the state level for everything. But HPLN is the housing planning grants that's available for the housing action plan, comp plan, water supply element components that we would like to get professional assistance to help us support. There's also local planning capacity grants or LPC grant that is available through Proposition 123. That was a voter initiated provision that's produced or resulted in a statewide affordable housing supply. And Ms. Lenore is going to give you more details on that in just a moment. But that local planning capacity grant program is available through Prop 123 funds if we opt in and if we meet fast track provisions, which is an expedited review process for qualifying affordable housing projects. So there's opportunities there, as well as additional funding for housing affordability that we would like to tap into by opting in or making a commitment to Prop 123. And then I know I'm touching on a lot of topics because they're all overlapping, and this was a really difficult presentation to put together to roadmap this for you. But what we've identified is, in addition to these requirements of these different legislative acts, Prop 123 is a funding mechanism to help us get to some of those goals. There's grant funding available for various topics, depending on the topic, which pool you pull from. Updating our comprehensive plan is going to be a component to address a lot of these topics, as well as other topics like transportation and mobility that we're bringing forward here later this year. Tying all that together and then updating the land use code to make these effective in our development review procedures or other policy documents for things like fee waivers, fast tracking, we'll talk about in a little bit more here, and other types of housing incentives like ADU programs and other things that have other dedicated funding sources. So this, many of you may recall when we were going through the housing needs assessment, I think I said it at every meeting, that affordable housing is very complicated and we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg. So we are definitely in the mix now for looking at those next steps. But even on this visual graphic, we have a very small "You are here" marker on the very first column. A little tongue in cheek, but very real that we've only touched the tip of the iceberg and there's a lot more work to do in order to be compliant with legislative requirements for these different acts and to tap into resources that will allow the town to proactively look at housing affordability as a community need. So referencing the housing needs assessment, you might recall that we presented this as short-term, medium-term, long-term, and ongoing implementation strategies. On this slide, this is a screenshot from the housing needs assessment that was adopted in April. As part of that same effort back in April, we identified some of the short-term goals that we felt we could accomplish. And most of that was geared around, let's remove some of the barriers that are otherwise preventing affordable housing from being developed in the community. And those were things like our lot sizes were quite large, didn't allow for appropriate densities that make units more affordable, had parking requirements that were more onerous than maybe was needed to meet the needs of affordable housing projects, and dimensional standards, the net density requirements. So we proposed a whole suite of removing regulatory barriers that we could do in a cost-effective manner, and we approved that ordinance in April. Now we're looking at what are those next steps. So some other short-term goals we've identified that are boxed out here. Updating the design review process for special exemptions for housing and the fast track policy for expedited review for qualifying projects, waived or reduced permit fees for qualifying affordable housing projects. These are code and policy considerations that we'd like to evaluate as we move forward and present those to the public for feedback and the Board of Trustees for consideration and possibly ultimate approval. We'd also like to look at some of the longer term strategies, introducing inclusionary zoning practices. This is a code requirement that would require new developments to meet certain objectives for AMI, area median income, or a quantity of units that meet certain standards. That's likely could be accomplished in a couple of different ways, but presenting more information on what that could look like, what the policy framework would include, and some pros and cons for those different strategies is something we want to evaluate. And ongoing strategies identified: pursuing HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, and DOLA, Department of Local Affairs, funding opportunities or mechanisms. So that's where those grant procedures that we mentioned a minute ago and Proposition 123 funds come in. Those are available dedicated funding sources for implementing affordable housing that we'd like to see if we can acquire some of that funding. And then the last one, we've identified developing and maintaining a NOAA inventory. NOAA is naturally occurring affordable housing. These are market rate or housing that's sold on the open market that's not subsidized in any way, that's still meeting area median income goals. So there are a few out there, but we don't have a mechanism for tracking them, and we would like to have one so that we can identify those. So that was my long-winded overview of these different elements that we're tackling, and we're going to weave in a couple of other ones throughout the housing affordability considerations as well, where they're applicable. But for these next couple slides, I would like to invite Ms. Lenore up here to the podium to introduce more details on Proposition 123 and some of the housing programs that she has been researching. Do you want this?
You can. Good evening, Commissioners. Brittany Lenore. So as Mr. Bird was mentioning, one of the programs through the Department of Local Affairs DOLA would be Proposition 123. It is a Colorado voter approved proposition, and that was approved in 2022, and it creates a statewide affordable housing fund. So that fund is managed by the Department of Local Affairs as well as the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. And so when looking at the funds available through DOLA for grants, We could look at a local planning capacity grant program, which is something I'll talk about a little later, as well as affordable homeowner program. So we'd be eligible for those. So to become eligible for these funds, a local government would need to opt into Proposition 123. And that basically means a commitment to increase affordability. And it's specifically by 3% within a 3-year cycle. So over your baseline. So that's a lot of words, but I'll go into it a little more. So the current reporting cycle that we are in would be 2023 to 2026. So if we decided to opt in, the deadline would be November 1st with a reporting ending December 2026. And that would be a 3% increase over the baseline. And so when we're talking about affordable, there is very specific definitions. So it includes rental and for sale housing. Rental would be at a 60% area median income at or below. For sale would be at or below 100%. But they also, the household cost cannot be more than 30%. Opposite. The cost cannot be more than 30% of your monthly income. So there's a caveat, there's a mechanism that we have to look at. So an affordability mechanism that would apply to new construction and preservation and conversion. So just to go over that a little bit more. So new construction is pretty self-explanatory, built new as affordable at that 60% for rental or 100% for ownership. Preservation are for units that have a affordability mechanism tied to them. So that would be like deed restriction or a land use restriction agreement that sets income limits, and as well as nonprofit or housing authority owned and maintained properties. That would be an affordability mechanism that would apply to preservation and conversion. So if, for example, an agreement was ending that would increase affordability, housing authority, nonprofit, or the town could take that and preserve that by extending that. So that would be a type of affordability that's preservation and conversion. Well, preservation. Conversion would be something like adaptive reuse, so existing commercial units that could then be converted to residential units. That could be an example of conversion. So the last type of affordable housing is naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAA. This is the only type that would not have a affordability mechanism. Just due to the age or location of the unit, they are just naturally more affordable. And so that would be the only, when we're talking about reporting, that'd be the only one that wouldn't have a mechanism tied to it. And so to talk about baseline, so again, Proposition 123 commitment is a commitment to increase affordable housing by 3% over a 3-year cycle. So 9%, 6%, 3%. And our baseline was calculated using guidance from DOLA, as well as their baseline assistance tool that uses census and Federal Reserve data. And so it was calculated at 52 units. Our baseline would be 52 units. And so a 3% increase would equate to 2 new affordable units by the end of the reporting cycle, December 31st, 2026. And so again, that could be new construction, that could be preservation, conversion, or naturally occurring affordable housing, rental, as well as ownership. And so a new baseline would start the following year in 2026 to 2028. And you can kind of see that graphic on the side. It's a little small, I apologize, but that outlines if you were to opt in at the start, it talks about this current cycle, which is 2023. You have a commitment to increase affordability by 9% over the 3 years. But again, the reporting would be at the end on December 31st, 2026. So in our next baseline, that commitment end date would be December 31st, 2029, if we decided to opt in for the next reporting cycle. And so just to zoom out a little bit, what does that mean? What happens if we opt in? We get, eligible for the funding. So what happens if we don't meet our commitment? Then that means that we would not be eligible for funding for the first year of the next 3-year cycle, until we become, compliant with our agreement. And so to talk a little bit more about the available grant opportunities, if the town were to decide to opt in, it'd be a local planning capacity grant program. So that is grant funds that we could use for planning related projects or studies. The maximum award is generally $250,000 with a 20% local match. But there is an incentive for an early adoption of fast track. So this would be in conjunction with Prop 123, and it's basically a expedited review timeframe for affordable housing applications where 50% or more of the units are affordable. And so basically at time of application completeness, the town would have 90 days to make a decision on the application. That's not when the application comes in, but once we determine it meets all of the objective requirements and forms, plans needed. And so for the town, if the town were to opt into Proposition 123 and also apply that fast track option, we could be eligible for up to $50,000 of local planning capacity grant funds with no local match required, because it's an additional incentive to not only opt into Prop 123, but also apply this fast track opportunity early. And so, yes, Proposition 123, there is a lot to it, but it is basically commitment to increase affordability. There is also that optional fast track. This is all optional, voluntary by the town, but it does open up opportunities for those grants and additional monies. So another component of housing and updates, water supply strategic growth would be our comprehensive plan updates. That is required under SB 24-174, the same bill that requires the housing needs assessment. And so that requires us to update our water supply or create a water supply element and strategic growth element within our comprehensive plan by December 31st, 2026. And so our water supply element would emphasize or look at water conservation policies. Those could be in alignment with the Colorado water policy, and also consulting and coordinating with local water providers. So there is that kind of working together component. The state has identified that there are demands in water, and so they wanted to include this water supply element in comprehensive plans. Additionally, there is a strategic growth element that talks about promoting infill development, conserving open space. The Department of Local Affairs will be providing guidance to local jurisdictions about what this means. That'll be rolling out around October. So we'd have more information on direction at that time. So those are just a couple of the elements that are required to be added. But we do have plans on the horizon to update some of our existing elements of the comprehensive plan, including the transportation element, parks and trails element, and our implementation section. So you'll be seeing that roll out in the upcoming months, years. It is a big effort. So the Housing Action Plan, as Mr. Bird mentioned, is the implementation component to the housing needs assessment So we did our housing needs assessment. And so how are we going to implement that? There are baseline components that are needed in the housing action plan, tying it to the housing needs assessment, and the effect of existing zoning and density on housing, focusing on equitable and efficient housing developments, and looking at any elevated risk of displacement areas. So this is a big effort. Our housing needs assessment was done by a consultant, Matrix Design Group, or Matrix LLC. And so for a housing action plan, we would look at housing planning grant program funds, HPLN funds, and that would be rolled out in fall of 2025 for the next round of awards. And there's no minimum or maximum award amount, but there is a 25% local match required. So that's something that we're looking into, and will be coming to you on the horizon in the future. In addition to our comprehensive plan, we will be updating our land use code and policies. Like Mr. Bird mentioned, we did recently go through, you all recently went through code updates to our land use code, amending those dimensional standards for affordable housing or in our zones, revising the parking standards, and expanding ADUs. So moving forward, there would be additional updates that we would want to pursue, including updating our design review process as it relates to affordable housing, expediting review timeframes, introducing inclusionary zoning policies, what that could look like moving forward, potential of reducing permit fees for affordable housing. Another thing would be updating the ADU language to allow ADUs within PUDs and HOAs, so planned unit developments and HOA areas. This is not a requirement for Wellington. We don't meet the eligibility requirements. We don't have to do it, but it would allow us to be eligible for grant programs, specifically the ADU fee reduction and encouragement grant program. So we would want to look to our planning commission and board for guidance on that moving forward. And so this is a lot of housing stuff that we're looking into. There's going to be other updates that we'll need to do, and you'll see on the left of that screen that we'll need to look at some landscape policy requirements that are coming through. There's more information to come to you in September, but just a little teaser about prohibiting turf in new residential developments. And there are additional turf standards for commercial landscape. So those will be coming to you guys shortly. Okay, so I will turn it back to Mr. Burr.
Thank you. All right, everyone keeping up with information so far? I know it's a lot. So appreciate Ms. Lenore's explanation on those different programs and what those will entail as we move through these different programs. Based on the aforementioned input and staff's research into these projects, we are recommending pursuing a number of these options. We feel that meeting the baseline for Proposition 123 is something that's achievable, that we could accomplish. And so we are encouraging and recommending opting in or making that commitment for the 1 year of the 3-year cycle. That would be 2 additional units. That would also make us eligible for the funding sources in Prop 123 for the town to apply for local planning capacity grants, which we think would be valuable to us for motivating some of these programs. It would also immediately make some of the programs that are available through Larimer County available to current home buyers or buyers looking to buy homes in Wellington. They could apply to Larimer County's mortgage down payment assistance program. But they can't currently because we're not opted in. So that would be an immediate benefit. It would also make some of the private dollars or private organizations, they could seek dollars through Proposition 1, 2, 3 for concessionary debt financing that might help make a project pencil a little faster and meet affordability goals. So we're recommending that as part of that Proposition 1, 2, 3. We are recommending the fast track process. We're aware that we could do that at a later date, but we think it would be strategically advantageous if we accomplish that on that incentive timeline by the end of the year to get some additional local planning capacity grant dollars through that with no match requirements, which is a huge benefit to not have to meet the 20% match requirements that is typically required of state funding. Staff is supportive and we're recommending applying for the housing planning grant funds to help with the housing action plan and the couple of comprehensive plan element requirements of HB 24-174. And we are recommending pursuing code amendments to address, or at least begin navigating the conversations around inclusionary zoning policies, reduced fee policies, expedited review, meeting some of those objectives that were identified in our strategies for the housing needs assessment, and beginning to move those forward. If we're not done, we at least want to have those conversations, and through some of these programs, we can get professional assistance from outside sources to help us navigate those conversations. So we have on this slide here, this is kind of another way of identifying what I just explained, but it puts things kind of into lanes where Proposition 1, 2, 3 and fast track are related, and the timelines that we would be looking to meet those by. As I mentioned a minute ago, if we opt into Prop 1, 2, 3, we could also meet this December 31 of 25 objective to get $50,000 of no match local planning capacity grant funds that would help us in advancing some of these goals. It would also make us eligible for other grant dollars and additional LPC or local planning capacity grant funds. The comprehensive plan update requirements are required by December 31st of 2026. Some of those elements are going to require a little bit of professional assistance to help organize, draft, facilitate public engagement on. And so making ourselves eligible for housing planning grant funds would be our recommendation, and we'd be seeking to submit a budget request in October here for 2026 budget to the Board of Trustees. Same for the housing action plan. That's got a little bit longer timeline on it here. January 1, 2028 is the compliance requirement for having a housing action plan adopted. But again, that's going to be that's a pretty big effort to align our housing needs, water supply, all these different pieces. So we want to be able to get started on it where we're developing some of those pieces concurrently, and grant funds would be available with that 25% match requirement. So we're proposing and seeking budget approval for matching funds for applying for housing planning grant program and local planning capacity funds. And then the land use code updates and policy considerations I mentioned a minute ago. It kind of transcends all of these because each step or each program that we look at would have some element of code or policy that would need to be associated with it to make it effective. So those are our pathways that staff has identified. And at this point, we've broken this into kind of categories for planning commission discussion and guidance. It's hard to say with as I mentioned before, this is complicated subject matter. There's a lot of different requirements and moving parts. Different funding sources apply to one thing and not to another. So we broke this down in ways that made sense to town staff. And so if it helps for facilitating conversation and direction, tackling these topics by these columns, I think would help in terms of if we're moving in the right direction. Does the planning commission like what you're hearing for the path that staff has identified, and or do you have feedback that would help guide our consideration through these various processes? So we are seeking that direction on if you'd like to hear more information about any of these, we can answer questions. Or if you've liked what you've heard and you just want us to advance those plans, we'll take that recommendation to the Board of Trustees next Tuesday, and we'll be having the same presentation and conversation with the board.
Okay, I mean, I think discussing them as these four, does that sound like a reasonable thing to try to look at each one individually, then maybe give guidance and then move to the next one? There probably will in fact be overlap between the two, but I don't know if that is a logical approach or not.
They're
Are you-
very connected, so.
Are you saying like right now, just dissect each one?
Yeah, well, I guess we're at the
Because
point
we
where
kind of, okay.
I guess staff and if we have comments, and I think someone kick it off.
I have a couple questions.
Please.
Just define to me the grants. These grants coming in to help the town like facilitate like extra staffing to be able to get these properties going? Is it helping permit cost, for the applicant? Is it helping, where would that grant money be going and used for?
Yeah, good question. So the different grant sources have different obligations or eligibility to them. So it depends on which pot of money we're talking about. But to give you some examples, the HPLN or Housing Planning Grant that we've mentioned is specific to the Housing Action Plan implementation and the comprehensive plan elements. So those funds would likely be used to obtain outside professional services to assist staff with doing research, drafting code, facilitating public engagement, getting, online surveys, public engagement information into that report, and then drafting, here are the recommendations based on what we heard and the town's needs. So professional services would be the primary goal for that one. Local planning capacity grant funding is available to us if we opt into Proposition 123. Local planning capacity grant funds have a little bit broader net. They can be used for, and they have different match requirements with it. If we use it for comp plan elements, it's a 50% match because that's not really what it was intended for, but you can use it that way. A 25% match on the local planning capacity grant funds if we're using it for building capacity for our local staff. So that could be hiring outside resources. It could be professional service contract for kind of a one-time effort. It can be used for hiring additional staffing. That has other implications like office space. Do they need, what equipment do they need that we'd have to come up with? But it could be third-party contract for a term limited time frame to assist with those things. We're not sure that's the right direction for Wellington, but it is an available option for us. The local planning capacity grant funds can also fund planning studies, like to evaluate property feasibility analysis. It can look at even preliminary design plans as long as it doesn't result in construction. Construction dollars are a different pot of money funding source, so you can't commingle them. But it can help with the planning studies to evaluate if you have a viable project or not and how to help advance that project. Proposition 123 does have more of the concessionary debt financing. That's construction dollars. It has home buyer assistance programs associated with it. A lot of those programs, they don't just give you a check for the money, it funds the program. So we'd have to also create a program that we could administer, and that funding could be used to, LPC money could be used to fund administration of the program, and then you actually get the dollars from the construction grants or the home buyers assistance grants. So infinitely complex and intertwined.
Sure.
But those are some examples of how that funding can be used. Staff's recommendation currently our primary focus would be to take advantage of professional service funds to allow our local staff to be the local planners and address the community needs, continue with development review, economic development goals, other assisting our residents and applicants, and then guiding professional consultants on implementing some of these different programs. And we'd be the local eyes and ears to make sure that what the product they give us is still meeting the community needs.
Well, I'm grateful that we've done the comprehensive plan not so long ago because we did put a fair bit of that in there.
Yep.
And even water, usage. So, yeah, I'm excited to see this. When we started talking before about affordable housing, it's like, okay, we're putting it down there, but we don't really know how it's going to come to fruition. But it looks like there's things coming out. So that's exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Knapp.
Anyone else have any comments about?
I like it all except for the part about no turf in new construction, but that's not you, so. Or that's next month.
Yeah, I think we threw that in there because it was one that we weren't quite prepared to talk about tonight, but we will have to be talking about it. We're gonna do a similar presentation on that in September, on those requirements, because there are a couple of requirements that we have to comply with by end of the year. So
But overall, I think your track is great. Like, I don't need to like do each one. I think
Okay.
it apply like it shows that we're moving forward in a very thoughtful way, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I would, I mean, one question regarding the fast track, just looking at that timeline on, what is it, page, by November 1st, completion by December 31st, so 60 days. And then you get this $50,000, right? You'd be eligible for it. Question
Correct.
is that, that's a staffing question and time question. I mean, do you think that's doable without blowing a gasket for you folks?
yeah, no, I appreciate the comment and then the support as well. I should point out that November 1st of 25 is the drop dead deadline to commit. We can opt in or make that commitment at any time. And yeah, we've already drafted the fast track policy and submitted it to the state for technical assistance, basically asking, we kind of shared with them a week or two ago, this is what we're recommending to our commission and our board of trustees. If they say, yeah, this makes sense for the town, we wanted to have some assurance that the path that we were on in the state's eyes was going to be successful too. So we did take some initial first steps to do and there's some model language out there that the state's developed too.
Okay.
And so we feel like this is a very doable time frame. Likely what we'll be asking of the board of trustees, if there's support from the planning commission and support from the board to make that Proposition 123 commitment, we may seek to do that sooner, like September, to be eligible for different application cycles in those grant funding, knowing that there's a lot of work to be done, and the sooner we can get into those programs, the sooner we can start the work. So we may be looking to move that up if there's support and direction to proceed.
Okay. Any other questions? I had a couple. So I guess I don't know if it's 1, 2, 3. So in 26, we would have to, Town of Wellington would have to achieve 2 more housing units that would fit the definition of affordable housing. With what you know, with any of the people building in town, is that an ask of the developers? Is that something you've reached out to any of these folks going, hey, is this something you could put into the mix in, a phase in 26? I guess I'm trying to figure out, because the town doesn't really have a stick to, I mean, I think it's more of an ask than a tell. So is that achievable?
We think that it is. The natural occurring affordable housing stock is one of the elements we talk about in these presentations. Those are the ones that are already on the market and sell at affordable rates. And so we'll look at those and having a mechanism for tracking them. That alone may, without any other intervention, may accomplish that 2% or the 2 units with the 3% goal.
Okay.
I do think, and it's by permit timeline, so permitted by the end of 2026 when we report it.
Okay.
If we can get in sooner, get some grant funding sources lined up, there would be other avenues to look at how do we use grant funding to incentivize some of those programs, discussions around fee reductions or a policy around fee reductions for qualifying affordable housing may also help tip the scale for one of our local builders to meet those criteria. So we think it's achievable. It's not a done deal, but it's something that's achievable. And we have a couple different ideas of how we would get there. The other thing I would throw out there is, as Ms. Lenore alluded to, if you don't meet that commitment goal, you sit out for 1 year of funding, and then you can opt back in and do it all over again. So there's very low risk to making the commitment. You may have to sit out 1 year and then you turn around and you try again. So
Okay.
it's low risk. And we have confirmation from the state that if you receive dollars through Proposition 123 and you don't make your commitment, they don't take it back. You just sit out for 1 year. So there's very low risk from a financial standpoint to that program.
Okay. That's good. I mean, from my standpoint, I mean, I certainly am supportive of, you know, making the commitment to Proposition 123, the fast tracking in the second column. And I mean, the other stuff, again, it's a little overwhelming, a lot of stuff, but I think getting the grant funding, I mean, we must do something, right? The choice is not to do. The town of Wellington does not have an option to say, we're not doing anything. We sort of have to do something.
Correct. We are required to adopt a housing action plan that identifies an implementation strategy for how we're going to meet our goals. We are required to update our comprehensive plan. We're required to include the water supply element and the strategic growth element. Not part of this presentation, but the other things we've alluded to, we are required to meet prohibitions on non-functional turf for landscaping. We're required to, by end of 28, implement regulations regarding how residents irrigate turf. There's a lot of things that we have to do. The town does not have to commit to Proposition 123. We don't have to apply for grant funding. Those are the carrots that are out there that will help us meet the things that we do have to do. And
Mhm.
so taken as a whole, we have to do these certain things, and the state has given us the tools to make that easier for the local municipalities to accomplish those things. So it makes sense to keep them paired together.
Yeah, I think so as well. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here, but I think the housing needs assessment made it pretty clear that there's some real struggles here in this community. And I don't remember, I can't remember, maybe one of you folks, like the percentage of people who live in Wellington currently who could not afford to purchase the home they live in now. I mean, it was a kind of a stunning number.
Yeah, over
Both of
40%
Lot.
of owners and renters were either cost burdened or severely cost burdened, meaning spending over 30% of their income on housing costs. I know we have the housing needs assessment identified a gap of 800 residential units by 2030. And our goal was that 20% of those should be single family attached or multifamily to help with affordability goals. And reduce, especially rental rates were particularly problematic in Wellington's market.
Mhm.
Most of the rentals are above AMI for qualifying for affordable housing.
Yeah, and what is the vacancy rate, less than 1%?
Yes.
Something like that. So
At the time, we'll update that document every 5 years as required by the state. So the ongoing compliance with these measures is something to think about too, that we have to update the housing needs assessment every 5 years and the comprehensive plan every 6. So we're just going to put that at the 5th year of our 5-year capital improvement plan.
Okay, because I mean, I'm wondering, and this is
Yeah.
probably not part of this, but I mean, with all this stuff coming up in the next couple of years, is there going to be a staffing ask for planning to handle some of this stuff? Because there's all the stuff you normally do, and this is now layered on top of that. So maybe something to consider. And I don't know where those discussions are going at this point. So, but probably not part of this discussion.
Not at this time, and I appreciate the comment. It's very, good foresight to think about the amount of work that's going to be required in addition to our day-to-day. We're not making any additional staffing requests at this time. We have a really good team of 3 planners right now, and we have support from some of our other planning team members and departments as well. If there was a need for capacity, we would be looking at some of those grant opportunities for hiring professional services or third-party contractors to help fill gaps as needed. And we would make appropriate budget requests when that time came.
Okay, that's all I have to say. Anyone else have any more comments? Bert?
Nope.
I'd say it's a kind of a must to go ahead with it.
Yeah, so seems like the direction of the board is to pursue these steps. I think that's the guidance. I think if we could do the fast track and approve that prior to the drop dead date on November 1st, that certainly would probably make that task easier maybe to accomplish in a longer time frame than 60 days. That's all.
Yeah, can I ask you to repeat that? Because I might clarify the timelines on that, but you're referring to the oops, wrong way. This slide with the,
Correct.
okay.
Correct. The top Proposition 123 and the fast track. I guess I would say if you could, and that's going to take a board action to approve that commitment, I'm assuming. We're offering a recommendation or
Yeah,
guidance?
it's not a requirement of Prop 123 to have the, an ordinance or resolution from the municipality, but as a local policy, we've received that there needs to be board direction before applying for those funds. So we're presenting this same presentation to the Board of Trustees next Tuesday. And we'll be seeking that guidance and direction. If they support some of these same programs in this direction, as early as September, we may be seeking that request for a letter of support or a resolution to opt in and to apply for some of these grant funding sources.
Okay,
So we're definitely thinking about that, kind of hoping for the best, that there's positive support for these programs to pursue, and we've put some pieces in place to be ready to act in these timelines.
okay, sounds good. I guess if there's nothing else in this subject, should we move on to communications?
Thank you. I appreciate your direction on these presentations. I know there was a lot of information packed in there
Good job.
in the slideshow.
Hmm.
Sorry, I need to sit down. It's been a little time staying up there. For the communications, is that where we're at now?
Yes, I think
Okay.
you have the second quarter, 2025 residential building permit and a lot of inventory report.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So this is a quarterly update. Normally this is through end of June. We normally would have put this in the July packet, but the July meeting was canceled due to lack of agenda items or no action items. So it's about 1 month delayed. We have had a few more residential permits during this time frame, and commercial counts haven't changed from this report. Possibly noteworthy, and I know we've discussed it in the past, but I'll remind you here. When the Planning Commission approves a site development plan for commercial, we don't immediately remove that lot from the inventory report because they haven't obtained a building permit and started construction yet. Sometimes those timelines change a little bit on the construction side. So recent approvals for Kaufman Robinson Inc. And Wellington Business Center, they're still advancing. We're having great communications with those teams, and they're moving right along. But we haven't removed them from the inventory report yet because there's not a building permit issued. So that's likely to change on a future report. If there's any questions regarding the permit activity and inventory report, I'll be happy to answer those. But those were the highlights.
Nope. Thank
Right.
you for including the commercial still. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we have it. We'll keep updating it.
I'm good.
Anything else from anybody here?
No.
Two real quick announcements from staff. I did notify the Planning Commission in an email communication, but I'll just announce it here as well. Stephen Carmen was one of our planning commissioners and served on the Planning Commission for a number of years, as well as on the Board of Adjustments. So we're appreciative of his service. He has resigned from the Planning Commission. He and his family are taking a different path right now, and he's committing to his family. So we wish him all the best in his future endeavors. But yeah, he has resigned effective as of the end of June. So we thank him for his service, and we have advertised that vacancy on the Planning Commission and are seeking applicants for that role. So we will continue to do that until we get that position filled and get the Planning Commission back up to a full complement of members.
Any responses to the current request for applicants?
It's only been out for about 3 weeks. And so we have not had a large response rate. So we have changed that to open until filled. But we would like to, if you know of someone who's interested in serving on the Planning Commission, if they need additional information, you can always point them to staff. I'm happy to answer any questions and help guide them to application forms and things of that nature. So please keep your ears out and encourage people to apply for that, as well as the Board of Adjustments.
Thank you.
Okay.
The other announcement that I'd like to quickly mention, our next regular meeting is in September. I can't believe I'm saying September already. But we are anticipating bringing additional information regarding legislative changes for non-functional turf grass. We'll tell you all about what that means, as well as some legislative changes to take effect by end of 2027 regarding residential irrigation requirements. We have to take action on that. So we'll be sharing that information in September. Depending on timelines and the direction from the Board of Trustees, we may advertise a public hearing for the EV charging component based on tonight's direction and trustees' direction. If it's ready and something that we can meet those timelines, we'll bring that to the September meeting for a public hearing.
Okay.
If it's not, we'll likely do it in October.
Okay.
Those are all my announcements. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess we adjourn.
Thank you.